Will, if you want to take it away.
Thank you, April. Good morning and welcome to the 5th webinar in our EV charging infrastructure training series. Thank you to those of you who have joined us along the way for our previous webinars. Black & Veatch has partnered with S-Curve Strategies to develop this training series for Los Angeles County and the California Energy Commission. For more than a decade, Black & Veatch has helped its clients develop EV charging stations around the US and the world. All in, we've helped deploy more than 30,000 charging ports at more than 2,500 sites. We're excited to hold this webinar training series to share key insights for developing successful EV charging projects. This webinar is the last webinar in this series that we are hosting in 2025. In this webinar, we'll share best practices about site design, energization, and operation of EV charging projects. This webinar builds on the content covered in the previous webinars and covers the key elements to understand as you take a charging project into construction and operation. Recordings of the webinars and the slide decks used in the webinars are being posted on the Los Angeles County website for you to reference in the future. We will post links to that information later in this training. If you have any questions during the webinar, please post them through the Q&A button in the Zoom, and we will do our best to answer them at the end. So let's get started with some introductions of our team today. I'm Will Einstein, and I'm a principal consultant at Black & Veatch, and I'm a member of our Clean Transportation Advisory practice. Prior to joining Black & Veatch, I spent more than 20 years in various roles leading the development of clean transportation and customer programs for a large electricity and natural gas utility. I'm a passionate owner of 2 electric vehicles and love to talk about driving and charging them. With me today are April Bolduc and Randy Shimka from S-Curve Strategies. April and Randy, can you introduce yourselves?
Great. Thanks so much, Will. It's so good to be here. I'm April Bolduc, president of S-Curve Strategies, and over the last 15 years, I think I've done hundreds of EV charging site walks, and I've spent a decade at San Diego Gas and Electric, with most of that time on their EV charging infrastructure team. And since then, over the last 7 years with S-Curve Strategies, I've worked on transportation electrification projects across the US and 13 different states. I've been driving electric since 2011. So we know all the trials and tribulations that come with EV charging infrastructure projects, and I am excited to share all of the best practices that I've learned with you today, and also to be here with my team members, Will and Randy. So Randy, if you want to take it away.
Very good. Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Randy Shimka from S-Curve Strategies. April and I have worked on various EV and charging related projects for several years there, and I bring over 35 years of utility engineering expertise to the table, including a decade focused on clean transportation vehicle and charging station projects. My educational background is in electrical engineering, and I also have a California professional engineer credential. Like Will, I'm very passionate about EVs. I do daily EV driving as well as numerous all-electric road trips. We often take detours on our trips so I can look at new charging stations and see what's being installed. And the growing EV charging public network makes every road trip fun, and we try to charge in new places all the time. So I'm thrilled to be here today and share insights on EV charging and best practices with you today for site design and energization and operation.
Thanks, Randy. And this session is part of a 5-part, really comprehensive webinar series, and it's designed specifically for municipalities across LA County and those just looking to install EV charging in commercial, residential, multifamily, or fleet locations. And each session, as Will said, really builds upon the previous one, covering strategic site selection is what we've already covered. We've covered business models and financing. We've covered regulations and implementation. We've also covered permitting. And so today we're on part 5, site design, energization, and operation. And so we will also at the end show the County of LA's website where you can view those recordings. So we're happy to jump in and get started. And this is our agenda today. So we'll discuss critical components, including site design best practices, grid connection, resiliency planning, essential construction and signage guidelines, charger commissioning protocols, operation strategies for maintenance. And we have some really cool case studies to share with you along with resources, and then we'll get into the Q&A. And we have really 5 key project elements for site design and operation. Our focus today is structured around these elements, and they include optimal site design, seamless grid integration and resiliency, robust construction practices, especially signage guidelines, effective commissioning of chargers, and then proactive operational maintenance. And right now we are going to jump right into site design best practices. And a well-designed charging site really directly influences any user satisfaction and safety. So we'll delve into strategic considerations as optimal placement, visibility, accessibility, security, and proximity to user amenities, and ensuring that every installation meets both user needs as well as the regulatory standards of what we've talked about in some of our previous sessions. And so optimal placement strategies, let's talk about really the best practices for site design and charger location. And we'll start with this optimal placement strategies. And first, we recommend placing the charging stations and the associated equipment in well-lit areas that are easily accessible for drivers. So this will help improve and enhance the safety of the site. It's going to make it more attractive for drivers that are trying to charge their vehicles. And security is really important at the site as well. And cameras and monitoring equipment can help gather report information and video, just if anything should occur. And as far as the location goes, we recommend trying to locate the chargers near various amenities that are at the site for longer stays and higher usage. But that's really part of the art and science of a site layout. And that sometimes those locational desires aren't always possible due to the utility equipment or other existing electrical infrastructure locations, and really minimizing the installation costs that are affected by distance. So for example, you're going to reduce those costs if you have the least amount of trenching that's going to take place. And the good news is that drivers are actually willing to walk a bit if the location of the charging equipment has to be moved a little bit closer to the existing utility connections, instead of having it located farther from the utility connections and you're incurring those excessive fees. And every site's a little different in this regard. But the final site design has to take into all these factors into account. So we also want to plan ahead and allocate sufficient space for vehicles to maneuver around the charging sites, avoid congestion if possible. And as a driver, there's really nothing more frustrating than not being able to easily access the various charging spaces at the site. So as site designers, we really want to make it as easy as possible for drivers to get in and out of the spots, easily plug into the charging equipment, and then go on about their day. What you can see here in these images, this is from the US Access Board, and these are graphics that for them, this really depicts the ideal charger placement and height when you're talking about ADA spaces. So for example, you can see here at the top, the height of the cord, because these cords can also be very heavy and awkward at sometimes. So you want to have the height and the weight of the cord to be as sufficient as possible. And then here you can see in this overhead view how you're able to access and maneuver down that ADA path that's required. So talking about user convenience, creating a user-friendly charging layout that accommodates vehicles of all sizes, from personal cars to delivery vans, that ensures accessibility for every user. And so clear signage and weather protection further enhances that convenience, also the reliability and the durability of your charging installation. So when it comes to user convenience for the site design, we want to ensure some best practice recommendations relating to the site layouts, the signage, and then also weather protection. It's important to design the layout for charging sites so that they can accommodate all those different vehicles that we had talked about. And we also recommend a clear and consistent signage for drivers so that they know what to expect at the site. Perhaps, you know, where the how much that the charging station is going to charge for you to cost, what are some of the parking rules, and also information just related to charging the vehicle in general. So for installations exposed to weather, if the project budget can support it, because of course adding weather protection, so if you're talking about a cover where you're providing shade or respite from rain, of course that is going to add to the cost of the vehicle. But we also, in thinking of what is that convenience to the driver, if it is in a really hot location, that is something to consider. Now, a lot of what's been coming up lately is curbside charging. We've seen that there are many different types of pilots taking place, especially across LA County in this area. And it's really an evolving landscape as to the types of technology, what is the best placement for them. So some of the use cases for curbside charging, so this would be a charging station that would be attached to probably a street light, something like that. They can also be standalone, but we're seeing a lot of attachments to street lights. Let's say it's a multifamily community and they don't have access or any additional parking spaces, but they do have a street light out on the street. That's one example. Parks with no parking lots at all, but you still want to offer charging. That's another example. Housing with no driveways, or even small business areas where you tend to see kind of that Main Street look that they would have attachment there. And then to curbside charging, one of the benefits that we're seeing is it can reduce on vandalism, because if you do have an overhead charger and it's a retractable cable that you're able to pull down and then it retracts into the system and it only comes back out for the next user to unlock that, that's a way to keep the cords from being cut. And then we're also seeing, especially in Europe, kind of this bring your own cord strategy so that you have an attachment from your vehicle that goes just directly into the charger. And as you can see in this graphic, this photo here, this is most likely the type of charging installation that you would not want to do. And why would you not want to do that? If we look here, when you see the driver coming up, they're going to have to step up the curb into this dirt area and to grab the nozzle and to also, you know, wave their card to make it work. Maybe they're using an app, but there's just a lot of obstacles that the driver is going to have to use to go through in order to use this charging station. And that's what we want to avoid. The good thing about it is it does have clear signage, 2-hour parking, EV vehicles only. So that's great. So now looking at site and infrastructure integration, we definitely have some good recommendations to share when it comes to integrating the charging equipment and infrastructure into the overall site. So the best results can be obtained budget-wise if you can utilize the existing electrical systems on the site as much as possible, because that's really going to help you reduce costs. And then it's going to help streamline the installation. But we know that that's not always possible for various reasons, such as maybe the panel that's nearby is full, maybe there is too long of a distance to the equipment, maybe the charging load is too high. So different things like that. And like I said before, every site's a little bit different, and it's definitely an art and science to get those best results. But practice makes perfect. And in the case where a new electric service is needed, the best practice is to locate the charging equipment on a spot to minimize the distance to the utility connection point. And this is going to help minimize those trenching costs, and it's going to reduce costs for wire. It's going to reduce costs for other materials to actually serve the chargers. And when it comes to network connectivity, it's important to remember that the charging stations need free and clear communication path for a robust internet connection. And that's what we're really looking for, is that robust internet connection. So the signals are usually fine in an open parking lot situation, but when the chargers are in a parking garage, underneath a building, they're in a parking structure, then usually special equipment is needed to make sure that the signal is good, such as an extender, repeaters, even a wired Ethernet connection can be required and ensure that good connectivity. We also recommend incorporating chargers into the parking layouts as seamlessly as possible, but without affecting the traffic flow or the space availability for the rest of the parking area. And we know that, a lot of times that's really easier said than done, because the location can pose challenges for installing chargers. But the goal is really to make the layouts as convenient as possible for the drivers. And there's also that aesthetic consideration to take into account as well, because we want to ensure that the charging stations, they blend in well with the site's existing environment, to maintain the visual appeal, as well as with the rest of the site. And this can be done with expertly designed landscaping changes and additions, or perhaps by wrapping the chargers with a particular design or a color scheme that blends in with the design of the site. So all in all, by incorporating as many of these suggestions as possible, it should result in a thoughtfully designed site that improves the driver experience, it optimizes EV charging efficiency, and it helps make the charging project a success. And you can see here in this picture that they did optimize this site because they put the equipment as close as possible to those DC fast chargers. And you'll see that they even gave up a couple of parking spaces in this retail center. So weighing those out, they felt like this was the most cost-effective place to put this equipment. And then two, getting into a lot of the medium and heavy duty site differentiators. What's really important about this, especially for fleet infrastructure, is we take into considerations like utilization of the fleet. How are they using the vehicles? What are the battery sizes? How long are the vehicles going to be parked there? What type of power is required? Because a lot of times you can tell, especially through these pictures, there's a lot of power that's required for this. In some cases, though, fleets with low mileage operation, like last mile delivery, those types of vehicle delivery with shift patterns, now they may allow for level 2 charging for fleets. So it just really depends on the need of that fleet. And of course, anytime you're dealing with any installation, you want to contact your utility early. You want to contact them often, and especially for these medium and heavy duty sites where we know there's a lot of power, you're going to want to contact them as early as possible. The charger positioning for fleets is interesting because it really helps the driver and it helps the fleet manager know how they can minimize their downtime, that those that are driving the trucks, they can easily access the stations and be on their way. So that's why when you see this bottom picture here, this is really a pull-through charging setup, which is much easier for drivers to maneuver around easily. And then, of course, on-site storage. When you have these really high-power sites, on-site battery storage is really going to assist you in leveling off your demand charges. So in many cases for these high-power sites, it really is the best way to go. And so now getting into grid connection and resiliency, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Will.
Thanks, April. Ensuring a reliable and resilient power supply is paramount for EV chargers. In this section, we'll cover planning for your site's connection to the grid and the technologies you can use to create reliable and resilient operations. There are 3 key elements to consider as you plan for connecting to your local utility service and resilient operations during potential power supply interruptions. First, proper grid connection begins with proactive coordination with your utility provider to ensure compliance and to streamline permitting processes. Second, incorporating resiliency planning through backup power systems, redundancy, and clearly defined emergency protocols will protect your infrastructure from disruptions. Third, off-grid and hybrid technologies can help operate a charging location at sites where there's limited to no electricity service. As we've highlighted in previous sessions, it's important to reach out to the local utility and begin coordination for service to the charging site as early as possible in the planning process. Early coordination will help identify the processes, technical requirements, and timelines required for new utility service connection. These utility processes and schedules can be a key controlling factor for construction and final energization of the charging site. Likewise, with permitting, without necessary permits and inspections of completed construction work, sites cannot be safely and functionally connected to the utility. And in fact, utilities may stop a project and delay final energization if the appropriate permit sign-offs and correct trenching or equipment installations are not performed to code or to standard. Beyond the grid connection process, it's important to plan for situations where the power may be interrupted due to storms, fires, or grid equipment failures. In these cases, having backup power service can be useful. Backup power can be provided by backup generators or energy storage systems. Another solution to help achieve continuous power supply is to add redundant electrical and other systems to the infrastructure and equipment supporting the charging site. Adding redundant equipment is usually only done at locations where even short service interruptions cannot be accommodated. Both resiliency and redundancy solutions can increase the cost and the complexity of a charging project, so you want to carefully evaluate the need and the size of the systems. Lastly, you'll want to create new protocols for emergency situations to fully implement resilient operations of a charging site. These protocols should be carefully crafted to make sure that you safely manage through any power disruptions. An electrical or engineering consultant can help advise on ways to effectively manage the cost or complexity of these components. Next, using solar and battery or hybrid systems can help improve the resiliency and the use of renewable energy at charging sites. In these applications, solar panels can be added by installing canopies over the charging site or on adjacent buildings to offset the energy consumed by the site with solar energy. Battery energy storage systems can also be installed and charged with solar or grid energy to help support charging system operations for limited timeframes when the power is out. Battery systems can be used to help manage the total amount of grid energy consumed by the vehicles charging at the site when the amount of grid energy is limited. This is done by charging the battery during certain hours and discharging it to the vehicles during other hours when the grid energy consumption is limited. Hybrid systems refer to installations where both solar and battery systems or other generation technologies are put into use. These hybrid systems can combine many of the technologies I mentioned to solve unique site design and operational challenges. Similar to backup generation, designing, sizing, and implementing these systems can add significant complexity to the site design and the construction of a charging site. They can also require additional consultation with the utility and permitting with the local jurisdiction. Back to you, April.
Great. So now we're going to jump into construction and signage, and Randy is going to take us through that. And the construction quality and clear signage, it significantly impacts the long-term success of EV chargers. And so employing experienced, certified electricians, strictly adhering to building and safety codes, and then deploying user-friendly signage and ensuring safe, reliable, efficient user experience. And I know, Randy, just your experience too as an engineer, this is top of your list of safety. So take us into the construction guidelines.
All right, very good. Thanks, April. We've talked about this a little bit of some of our previous webinars here, so I've got some best practices, kind of a summary for construction that will help make your EV charging station project a success. So it's very important to hire certified contractors that employ trained and certified electricians, and they need to have direct and relevant experience with installing and maintaining EV charging stations. The Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program provides inexpensive safety training for the installation and maintenance of EV charging stations and associated infrastructure, and it's a requirement actually for many projects that receive state or ratepayer incentives. But when it comes to code compliance, we also recommend that you and your contractor adhere to all of the local building codes and electrical standards, such as the National Electrical Code, and all of the relevant safety regulations that are in your jurisdiction. And this means easier and smoother project approvals when permitted and inspected, and quicker timelines when work is done correctly the first time. And regarding the topic of quality assurance, One suggestion that I have is to assign a very knowledgeable person from your organization that will keep a sharp eye on the job day to day as it progresses, and will enforce those quality control standards with contractors and electricians during the construction process. Catching and correcting any issues as they occur is so much easier than having to go back and having to fix things later. And there may be inspections required by the utility for trenching and other requirements, and it's best to work with the utility personnel early on those requirements so that the inspections and the associated approvals are routine and you pass with flying colors and no issues. So now we have some best practices to talk about suggestions for signage at the EV charging station sites. And so first off, clear and prominent signage should be installed at an EV site that directs drivers to the site, in particular to the parking area, and it marks the EV charging locations and informs drivers of any particular guidelines or rules that are involved with the chargers. So user instructions can consist of specific information about the site and the chargers, perhaps an overall site usage time limit or warnings that a car parked there must be charging or risk being towed away, any appropriate logos or contact information of the site operator for support purposes, or any other user instructions that you need to provide drivers as far as how to use the stations. And sometimes this is done with a QR code, for example. So additional guidelines about signage have to do with any other information that you might want drivers to know about the site, and matching the signage with site branding and aesthetics. April mentioned this previously, maybe wrapping the charging equipment with the site host logo and contact information, or any other useful messaging that will help make a nice charging experience for drivers. So now we have some information about highway signage guidelines. And if your EV charging stations are going to be located close to state highways here in California, Caltrans, they offer a service that'll be helpful to educate drivers about the location of your site when they're on the highway and driving by. So jurisdictions can apply to Caltrans to get standardized high visibility EV charging station signage installed. And the good news is that Caltrans will pay for the cost of the signs and their installation. And the process takes about 4 to 6 months to do, but there are a few requirements. The stations have to be within 3 miles of a state highway interchange, and the charging stations have to be available to the public for a good portion of the day, 16 hours a day. And they also require that you install some follow-up signs, as they call them, to be installed after the person gets off of the state highway and they're headed towards the chargers. The follow-up signs kind of direct them to that location.
All right, so now we're going to head into commissioning. And Randy, if you want to walk us through commissioning, because we know that that's just such a key, important part of this, and also tell us who does the commissioning, who approves it, what do we need to do, all of that good stuff.
Oh, very good. So after the charging stations are installed, the contractor or the vendor goes through a process called commissioning, where the stations are set up to be ready to put into service, and then they're tested and signed off before actually allowing drivers to use them. So the pre-commissioning preparation is to verify that the installation is compliant with all of the local building and electrical codes, and that certified contractors have also completed the installation work, as we've talked about. And in the testing and verification process, each charger needs to be tested to ensure that they power up and they're working correctly, and they can deliver various power levels to cars, because cars can actually request the power level. And the EV chargers are also tested to make sure that they're compatible with different brands of cars. And so the network functionality of the chargers also needs to be set up and tested. And once that is working correctly, then the chargers need to be integrated with the associated remote monitoring systems on the back end for performance tracking. And in addition, the network chargers and back end need to be set up with all the necessary alert parameters so that the maintenance teams will receive word and can address any performance issues as soon as possible. So additional commissioning recommendations include making sure that all of the commissioning test results are saved in a central document that can be referred to later on if there are any issues with the chargers. It's nice to have a document that you can refer to and get that past information. And so organizing this documentation will help to ensure that all the necessary permits and approvals from the utilities as well as the municipalities are obtained and finalized. And it's also important to train staff on basics like charger operation, how to troubleshoot, and any emergency protocols that need to be followed in case anything goes wrong with the charging stations. And this training, of course, will help to ensure a higher level of availability for the chargers. And after the commissioning process is completed, the charging installation needs to be approved before the equipment is placed in service. And so in LA County, EV charging stations are usually certified by the LA County Public Works Building and Safety Group. They issue permits for EV charging installations and also conduct inspections to ensure compliance with the various building codes. So now we're going to talk about best practices with respect to charger protection. There've been some EV charging station vandalism recently in the news that you probably heard about. And so in order to protect your charging site, additional security measures might be needed, including the installation of additional cameras and lighting and other security devices and monitoring equipment and even signage that can help deter or prevent vandalism. And there are some things that can be done with respect to cord strengthening to prevent damage. I've been hearing that some manufacturers are looking into offering charging cables that have reinforced stainless steel braiding that makes it resistant to cutting. And in Europe, for many years, level 2 charging stations are commonly installed without charger cables, and the drivers carry their own cable with them that plugs into the charger and then into the car. And this provides additional security by having cables in place at the charger that can be damaged or vandalized. And these are just starting to be used in the US. They're not very common just yet, but a lot of people are talking about that. Of course, the initial cost may be higher for this additional protection, but it could pay off in the future with less security and vandalism issues. And as far as payments go, the more versatile, the better, is what I always say. And so many incentive programs for charging stations will have requirements for different types of payment systems that need to be supported, including credit cards or mobile payments, cards that the driver carries with them, or fobs. Be sure to check the program rules if you're getting incentive funding to make sure that the chargers that you choose have all these necessary payment system options available that are required. And so with respect to driver usage guidelines, especially for employees and fleets, clear rules need to be established, and such time limits or charging station usage and rules about moving the car when not charging and penalties for not moving, like idle fees. And so these types of rules help ensure that the charging stations are available when drivers need to use them. So when you're starting the process to figure out what your current and future EV charging needs are going to be, a great way to gather information is to send out a short survey to your staff members and ask questions about their present and future EV purchases and their associated charging needs. So we've seen in the past that just an announcement about installing EV charging will get people to start thinking that maybe it's time that they jump on the EV bandwagon and get a car, which we call the if you build it, they will come line of thinking. And a few questions of a sample survey could be seen here that could be used to gather this type of information from your staff. And the end result should give you a good idea about what the present charging needs are, as well as what those needs might grow to a year or now down the road.
All right, so now let's get into some operations and maintenance. And really, we know that that ties to reliability and availability of charging. So tell us about that, Randy.
Okay. So routine maintenance practices for your EV charging installation, they're very important for long-term charging station health and maximizing uptime. And in my experience, there's nothing like having someone go out periodically to do an in-person inspection to really know what the status of the charging stations are at a particular site. And so in conjunction with the physical inspections, a preventive maintenance schedule, or PM schedule, will help to keep the charging stations working their best. Most charging station manufacturers have recommended maintenance schedules that you can use and expand on. And some examples of items that could be done during that site visit include inspections and testing the operation of the charging station and payment system, checking the charging connectors for damage, cleaning air filters, and installing any firmware updates, just to name a few items. And in addition to inspections and preventive maintenance, it's also important to have repair procedures in place that technicians can refer to. So this will help to minimize downtime, and it gives the service techs good information at a glance about the more common issues that they might see with the equipment. In many cases, the charger manufacturer will have materials like this already put together in the form of a service manual that can also be used as a starting point. So we also have some best practice suggestions for monitoring and troubleshooting chargers to keep their uptime and availability at a high level. Remote monitoring is valuable for this, and you can leverage this built-in function of network charging stations pretty easily. Charging station administrators can use these remote monitoring features to track charging station performance and see what issues, if any, are going on with the equipment. And an additional feature that can also be implemented with network charging stations is automatic alerts. So the chargers can be programmed to send out alerts to the maintenance team if certain things happen with the charging stations, such as a loss of power or failed charging sessions or payment system issues, things like that. The manufacturer will have experience with these type of alerts and what can be programmed, and the site host or maintenance team can implement the alerts that make the most sense for them. And another thing that's valuable for the support staff to have is troubleshooting guides for the charging stations that can be accessed by the administrators or the support personnel. And the guides can have information relating to the more common issues and what steps need to be taken to resolve them.
Great. Now we're going to jump into maintaining reliability and availability. Randy's going to tell us about that. But first, I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, just post them in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to address those in our Q&A section that's going to be coming up shortly. So, Randy, tell us about maintaining reliability and availability.
Right. Very good. So another important topic is ensuring long-term reliability and availability of the equipment. And there's several best practice strategies to do this. And keeping a spare parts inventory to enable faster repairs is very valuable. So that, as you know, the faster an issue can be repaired or resolved, it means that additional downtime can be avoided on the charging stations. And in many cases, charging station manufacturers have put together a list of recommended spare parts in the form of a kit that can be purchased and kept in stock. And it's also very important to build strong vendor relationships so you can have quick access to technical support and spare parts when needed. And so in some cases, priority service access and faster shipping times is sold as a subscription service by the vendors. But whatever the method is that you use to buy the parts, it's important to have an account and a purchase order for payment set up in advance with the vendor so that parts can be ordered and shipped out as quickly as possible when needed. And if you use something from that spare parts kit, you want to order it right away and get it replenished so you'll have it if something else should occur. Monitoring key performance indicators on each charging station is also a proactive way to enhance the overall reliability of the stations. There are many indications that can be monitored, and these will help service or maintenance teams maintain good charger reliability. So when it comes to continuous improvement and improving the charging station experience at your site, your drivers or customers are really one of the best resources for feedback because many of them use the charging stations often, so they can tell immediately if something's wrong when they're trying to charge. And if you harness that resource and give them a way to get that feedback from the drivers, it'll really help improve the charger experience for all users. In addition to driver feedback, it's also a great idea to analyze data that is gathered from the stations themselves on that periodic basis. So this data can be used to spot trends and make improvements as well to the charging experience. And in addition, it's valuable to host regular and continuous training for the staff on whatever improvements have been made to the back-end systems, the charging stations, or any changes made to the maintenance practices. In addition, the training sessions are also a good time to discuss and review any new technologies or improvements related to the equipment that might be coming soon. It's always nice to keep your staff up to speed on new things that might be coming.
Great. Thanks, Randy. And so now this is one of my favorite parts, jumping into some of the case studies, because we're going to show you some pre-design work and then also some completed design work, just to give you an idea of what you should be looking at when you do see these designs. And so this first one here is really this pre-engineering design. A lot of times we call this a desktop review. And in this particular instance, the engineer had already been out on site and put together this kind of draft of what the locations of where the chargers would go and where the equipment would go. And then this particular draft then would be circulated around internally to confirm that this is correct. This could also be shown to the utility prior to final design or even the design work starting, to ensure that this really is the location where you want to have your chargers. Because of course, when you have your engineers go in and start doing the design work, that can get expensive if you're making a lot of changes there. So let's just look at this briefly. In this instance, we're co-locating both public and private charging. And so you can see on the upper right-hand side, the public and employee charging is there. ADA is included. And with this particular use case, the county wanted to consider using the utility rebates and using one for public and employee charging, and then also using one for fleet charging. So a lot of times you don't see them located this close together, but it's a really interesting case. And then in that this fleet charging would be separate on a separate line. And then it also includes a DC fast charging. So the yellow there would be level 2, and then the blue there is DC fast charging. And then down below, this is where the equipment would go. So it is going to be a little bit of a run, as you can tell, from where the equipment is located to the public and employee charging. But those are just some of the kind of decisions that this particular owner of this parking lot made, and at least put the fleet as close as possible to this location. Randy, do you want to talk to us a little bit about public DC fast charging?
Very good. So I have a couple of ADA exceptions to go over first, just to refresh people's memory. So according to the California Building Code, there are 2 scenarios where it isn't required to meet the ADA requirements for an installation. So the first scenario would be if the EV charging stations are not available to the general public and they're intended to be used by a designated vehicle or driver, such as in the case of fleet vehicles, then the ADA requirements for the chargers don't apply. And in addition, if the EV charging stations are installed in public housing areas or intended for use by an EV owner at their home or residence, then the ADA requirements don't apply there as well. And there's also an exception that applies to the ADA path of travel requirements if the new charging stations are going to be installed at an existing facility where charging is not a primary function, such as a shopping center, an office building, or a hotel, then the path of travel exception may apply. But if the site's primary or main purpose is to provide EV charging, then, such as a charging hub, for example, then the path of travel is required. And so another issue that comes up periodically in the permitting process is a requirement for a certain number of parking spaces at a commercial property. So this could be affected when installing chargers and equipment by reducing that count because of the equipment needs. But AB 970 addresses this issue by directing the jurisdiction to reduce the number of required parking places by the amount necessary to accommodate the new chargers. All right, so next up we have a DC fast charging site to look at. And so at this particular site, there's 14 DC fast charger dispensers that were installed with dedicated parking spaces. And so at the top of the drawing, you can see that there's 2 ADA parking spaces that were existing, and they were there prior to the chargers being installed. So these are left intact for the EV charging design, which is really below. The 14 DC fast charger dispensers are shown with 1 dispenser per dedicated parking space. And for this installation, the charging dispensers are installed in the front of the parking spaces, which makes them kind of back-in spots. There is 1 dispenser there at position 4D that's in a pull-in configuration, just due to the geometry of the spaces there. And so new ADA parking spots were identified and striped with the appropriate spacing, and a new path of travel is seen there. And it's just on the left there between spaces 1A and 1B there by that blue box. So the charging electronics and the associated infrastructure is installed at the right side, and it includes a new utility transformer, charging cabinet, switchgear, and a separate meter, and a utility switch that is used in case of outages to isolate or reconfigure the distribution circuit. And so all of this equipment is protected, you see on the left-hand side there, by removable bollards, and so it can be serviced easily. And then next we have the entrance to the parking lot is shown down below. And it has a 25-foot drive aisle that's specified. There's paint striping there. The specification for the installation is called out to be 4-inch white lines, and concrete wheel stops are used to protect the charging equipment. And the dimensions of the parking spaces are called out, and the charging dispensers are protected by fixed bollards as well. So this is a fairly compact design. Fairly typical design, and it minimizes cost because everything is relatively close by.
So now looking at fleet level 2 and dual ports.
Yeah, so this particular site has 12 dual port chargers there for fleet charging, and they're shown in between each pair of parking spaces. And the site can accommodate a total of 24 fleet vehicles that can be charged at the same time. And the infrastructure is installed in that upper right part of the drawing there next to parking space number 12. So it was placed there to make it easier for the trenching that feeds the charging stations within that existing elliptical concrete curb area there where the chargers are. And so all of the parking spaces are covered by a canopy for weather and sun protection, and concrete wheel stops are used to keep the vehicles from damaging the EV charging stations. And so no ADA accommodations are needed here since this is a fleet charging installation, and the utility overhead and underground infrastructure is called out at the bottom of the drawing as well. So this is a fairly straightforward level 2 fleet installation. I think they made the best use of the existing parking area and minimize costs there with the way that they've laid out the equipment.
All right, so lastly, we'll jump into just some key takeaways on site design best practices. Just really focusing on the charger placement, enhanced safety and accessibility, and the user satisfaction for the driver. And then on number 2, we talked about connecting to the grid and planning for resiliency, just ensuring that that's as effective as possible, and resiliency being provided by backup power supplies like battery storage. And then also construction and site guidelines. We really want to take in what that driver experience is like, to ensure that it is the most safe, reliable installation that we can do. And then up top here, for number 5, focused on operations and maintenance, that we're proactive when it comes to monitoring and ensuring reliability and also availability of the EV charger's performance. And then actually number 4 down there is commissioning and operational considerations, and that we have thorough commissioning and operational strategies in place when we are doing our charging installations, and going back to them being as user-friendly as possible. So for resources, I'm going to turn it over to Will.
Thank you. As with on the previous webinars, we've included this resource slide that it has some industry, state, and local government resources that were highlighted in today's webinar. We hope that these resources will assist you as you prepare your site for final design and construction, as well as energization and operation of your project. Now it's time for the Q&A session. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a question, please use the Q&A button to ask that question. While you're submitting any questions that you may have, we've provided a link to where the recordings for this webinar series will be posted on the LA County website. And we're also sharing a link to a survey that we'll send out to webinar participants to get your feedback on this series. For our first question, Randy, we talked a little bit about contractors, and talked a little bit about operations and maintenance throughout all of this. Are there contractors who might be able to perform the routine maintenance on chargers for a site owner if they don't want to do it themselves?
I've seen that happening more and more. I think in the early days, a lot of the focus was just on the installation, but now I think people realize that maintenance is needed, of course. And so I've seen some businesses pop up that are offering those services. And some of the entities are actually taking it on themselves. The site hosts, I know a few site hosts that are doing it themselves and getting training for their own technicians to do it. So you could farm it out to a third party or keep it in-house.
Wonderful, thank you. And another maintenance related question, how long does it take to replace a port or a cable if it's vandalized or cut, and how do you go about doing that?
I've seen it done a couple of different ways. To make it the most expedient way possible, I've seen the service person go out and just replace the entire station, even though it's really just the cable that needs to be replaced. And then they do the repair of that behind the scenes and then keep that station as a spare to put back into service later. But I think that if you're talking about just doing the cable replacement, I think that could be done in an hour or two. Sometimes they don't want to be out there that long. They have other work to do, or they want to get the station back in service. But I think a couple of hours would really do it if they wanted to do it on site.
Great, thank you. April, you mentioned that site designs are continuing to evolve. What's the best way to stay up to date on the best practices and the improvements that are made for site designs?
That's a great question. I think it's really talking with your local engineer, your local consultants that are helping guide you through that process, as well as talking with the city. They'll have some great best practice information for you, the city or the county. And then also the utility. Like I said, you know, even taking that early kind of desktop review design that we showed you there with the fleet and also the public and employee, just taking a design like that to your utility to ensure that, okay, yes, there is the needed capacity in that particular area, or they'll explain to you the type of upgrades that they'll need to make and any costs associated with that. So I think it's just, you know, really keeping yourself proactively informed within the utility, the municipality, and then also, like I said, your local electrician or engineer and consultant designer.
Great, thank you. When we talked about signage earlier in the webinar, and a question that came up is, do cities have to use signs that are provided by Caltrans? You know, there's some standardization going on, but do they have to use those Caltrans signs, or are there other sign types or designs that they could use?
Well, I would say with your question about Caltrans, Caltrans is the agency that actually places those signs in the highway positions. So I, as a site owner or a charging company owner, I'm not really allowed to go out into that space to put signs up. But if I want to put signs closer to my own installation, I have quite a bit of freedom to do that. I can customize the signs to what I would like them to be. And there, like you said, there are standardized signs that a lot of people use, and that way they don't have to do the design themselves.
And sometimes too, the follow-up signage is that the municipalities are allowed to install as well. The site host would not be able to install those signs. They would need to have the permission from the city, because the follow-up signs, a lot of times you'll see them placed on street lights or near other signs. So you would need to get approval from your municipality to do that as well.
And a follow-up question that just came in is, how long is the process to request signs from Caltrans, and how does that normally take?
I was looking at their website, and it even says right there on their website that it could take 4 to 6 months. So they don't make any promises about it being quick, and they recommend that you get started early and actually start the process for the follow-up signs at the same time, so that you're working in parallel to get both of the signs in the pipeline.
So another element that needs to be planned early and often in the process of thinking about your charging site as you get going. I think that's, if there aren't any other questions from other participants in the webinar, I think that's all the questions we have for today.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We really appreciate it. You can see this image here on the right-hand side. This is what the website looks like, where you can go and you can watch all of the other sessions. This session will be posted soon. And just on behalf of Laura Inaconi and Jennifer Caron, we just wanted to say thank you so much for participating in this 5-part webinar series, especially from Los Angeles County and the Internal Services Department. So thank you, and we'll see you at potentially the next one. Thanks again.